It is night, and it's raining. But it's always raining in this part of France. The trench groans softly. The wood supports, swollen and slick with mud. Everything is slick with mud. The boots, the rifles, the faces of the men crouched like shadows pressed into the earth. The sky above is an oily smear, starlight strangled by clouds thick as smoke. And beneath that bloated sky, the western front stretches like a rotting scar. Nothing moves, not yet. A rat scurries along a plank, slips, vanishes into the dark. Somewhere in the east, a flare screams into the clouds. Then silence again. Private Jonah Elwood, age 23. Sheffield-born, leans back against a sandbag wall, slick with seepage and rot. Fingers numb round a stub of cigarette. He doesn't smoke it, just holds it like a talisman, a charm from a world before the war. The trench stinks of damp canvas, stale sweat, and the heavy metallic scent of blood, long washed away, but never quite gone. His hands, scraped and raw from digging, tremble slightly as he presses his boot against something hard, embedded in the wall. A splinter of old wood. No paper. He crouches, fingers claw into the clay and pull. The object comes loose with a soft gasp, like breath from a buried lung. It's a sheet of heavy stock, folded and crusted in grime, the edges chewed by time and damp. He wipes it on his sleeve, unfolding with caution, like it might fall apart from the air alone. It's a drawing, charcoal, precise and fine, sketched in delicate, obsessive lines. A city skyline. He recognizes it dimly. London. But the buildings are unfamiliar, all sharp angles and glass. Smoke curls over the Thames. Above, planes, dozens of them soar in perfect V formations, blotting out the sky. Below the drawing, in a spidery hand, this is how it begins. September 1940. You probably won't survive this. That's what they say behind gritted teeth in the dugouts, after too much rum, when someone asks about the future. The thing is, it's not a joke. It's a quiet contract in the eyes of every soldier here. You will not live. The war will not end. The calendar will run out before your lungs do. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments below. I want to know where in the world you're listening from tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The kind of place where units rotated through like furniture in a dusty room. Keep the Germans honest. Don't push too hard. Don't get noticed. But there was something about this trench section, C9, they called it, that didn't feel like a holding place. It felt like a waiting place. Waiting for what? The first time he stepped into it, he felt it immediately. A pressure, subtle and strange, like walking into a cathedral mid-sermon. The men already stationed here spoke little, dug less. They were a brittle sort, sharp around the edges, and overly cautious about the trench wall near the south bend. Don't dig there, a corporal muttered on day one. Bad soil. That night, back in the dugout, he waits until the others sleep, if you can call it that. The haunted twitching of exhausted men. He lights a candle stub, careful to shield it with his helmet. Then, slowly, reverently, he pulls the drawing free again and studies it. The detail is uncanny. Each building is shaded with obsessive care. Reflections in windows, smoke trails from chimneys, shadows that fall with the accuracy of someone who knows how the light lands in London. He notices something new, a tiny figure at the base of one building. A boy, it looks like, looking up at the sky. And the planes, they're not biplanes. They're too sleek, too symmetrical. He's seen enemy aircraft, clunky, noisy, almost clumsy things. These machines in the drawing, they look like birds carved from metal, elegant and terrifying. A gust of wind pushes through the cracks in the boards. The candle flutters. Jonah refolds the paper again, more carefully this time, not just to protect it but to protect himself. Whatever this is, it doesn't feel like something that was meant to be seen. It feels like something that wanted to be found. Outside, the distant thump of artillery grumbles across the miles. A rat shrieks. Somewhere overhead, a single flare paints the clouds in sickly white, and Jonah, crouched beneath 20 feet of ruined France, feels the cold certainty settle into his spine. Whoever drew this ... wasn't guessing. He doesn't sleep. He waits, for morning, or the next war, whichever comes first. Dawn is a diluted thing on the Western Front. It seeps upward, not with color, but with an ashen grayness that makes everything look half buried. The sun, when it finally appears, is just a brighter bruise on the sky. Cold fog hangs low, curling through the trench like cigarette smoke that forgot where it came from. You can smell it before you can see anything earth, decay, cordite from the night before. Jonah Elwood stands at the lip of the fire step, boots caked in clay. The drawing is folded tight in his inner pocket. His eyes are red-rimmed, skin pale beneath the grime. He hasn't spoken in hours. "Oi, Jonah," comes a voice behind him, Corporal Harding, scratching at his beard with dirty fingers. "You waiting for Jerry to come hand you breakfast, or you just admiring the view? Get your head back in your kit, lad. This trench'll eat you if you dream too loud. It's coming from the wire." He skrinks. There, 50 yards ahead, in the lowest coil of barbed tangle, something small, glinting. It's moving, slowly, almost imperceptibly. The wire trembles like a violin string pulled taut. No wind. Jonah steps down, heart thumping. He shouldn't be doing this. He knows the protocol. You don't investigate strange noises in no man's land. You report it, you write it down in the log, and you leave it be. But his feet disobey. He moves closer to the edge of the trench, peering through a periscope nailed to the duckboards. The lens is smudged, the view warped, but he sees enough. Something is out there. It isn't a rat, and it isn't the wind. It's a man, crawling slowly, deliberately, except it's the way he crawls that jars Jonah. The movement is too precise, like a film playing at half speed. The man wears a uniform that doesn't match German greys or British khaki. It's darker, sleeker, almost black, and strapped across his back is what looks like a tubno, a rifle, but with a shape Jonah doesn't recognize. The figure freezes, then turns his head. Jonah stumbles back from the periscope so hard he hits the trench wall. Cold sweat clings to him. His breath comes in short, dry gasps, because he knows that face. He knows it. He saw it just hours earlier in the drawing. It was the boy at the base of the burning building. Except he isn't a boy anymore. A whistle blows, sharp and shrill. Jonah snaps around. Lieutenant Marcus, the company commander, is striding down the trench, field notebook in hand, boots sloshing through ankle-deep muck. Behind him is someone new, tall, rail-thin, carrying no visible weapon. His uniform is regulation, but too clean. There's a curious absence about him, like he's been copied out of a sketch, rather than born. "This is Asher," says the lieutenant, without ceremony. "Sapper reassigned from reconnaissance company. Orders are to place him with us for the week." Because Asher's eyes aren't curious, they're remembering. Later, when the watch shifts, Jonah finds himself posted beside Asher at the southern curve, the same stretch where the drawing had been embedded. The sky is low and heavy, the kind of overcast that eats sound. Jonah sneaks a glance at the newcomer. Asher is crouched, not looking outward, but down, sketching in a little notebook balanced against his knee. "You draw?" Jonah asks, quietly. Asher doesn't look up. "Only what's real," he says. The pencil moves again, fast, precise, like a machine tracing lines it has memorized. Jonah's skin prickles. He glances down and sees the edge of Asher's drawing. A skyline again, but this time it's not London, it's Berlin. He recognizes the shape of the Brandenburg Gate, the Fernsehturm, but with rubble blooming at their bases. Smoke, fire, black arrows moving across the sky. Jonah's mouth goes dry. He tries to speak. What? That night, as darkness reclaims the trench, Jonah can't shake the feeling that time has started to loop in strange ways. The air feels wrong, too cold, too still, and out beyond the trench, the wire gleams wetly under a moonless sky. No one speaks. Even the rats are quiet. And somewhere in the darkness, something listens. Asher didn't sleep. That much was obvious. The dugout was cold, damp, and barely big enough for 3 bodies to lie shoulder to shoulder. But somehow, Asher always seemed untouched by discomfort. While the others groaned and shifted under lice-ridden blankets, Asher sat upright in the corner, sketchbook balanced on one knee, pencil dancing in slow, looping motions. His eyes never blinked, not once. By the 3rd day, Jonah had watched him enough to know Asher wasn't drawing what he saw. He was drawing what hadn't happened yet. It was subtle at first, a plain design with swept wings unlike anything currently flying over France. A city with cars, but no horses. A pair of soldiers with shoulder patches he didn't recognize, their helmets shaped like inverted bowls. And always, fire in the background. plumes of smoke that curled the same way each time, like someone had seen it burn and memorized the pattern. There was a word for that kind of knowing, Jonah thought, but he didn't know it. All he knew was that Asher unnerved everyone without trying, and not by doing anything wrong. On the contrary, he followed orders with uncanny precision. When told to dig, he dug. When told to hold the line, he stood motionless for hours. But something in him didn't belong to the year 1916. And then there was the humming. Each night, Asher would hum under his breath, a low, rhythmic melody. Jonah began to notice the pattern, always before an artillery strike, always before the first shell landed. Once, when the trench was quiet and the moon full enough to cast shadows, Asher hummed a slow, mournful tune, and 20 seconds later, German shells rained down with terrifying accuracy. It wasn't luck. It wasn't coincidence. It was warning. One afternoon, the tension finally cracked. Private Caro, barely 20 years old and already missing 2 fingers, snapped. He lunged at Asher in a frenzy, knocking the sketchbook from his lap and shouting, "What the bloody hell are you? You bring the bombs, you bloody call in with your witch hands." By the time Caro was court-martialed and dragged off for evaluation, the page was complete. A soldier strapped to a stretcher, his mouth open in a scream, disappearing into a thick fog. Jonah saw it. He recognized Caro by the tear in his sleeve. He wanted to believe it was coincidence, but even the most superstitious men in the trench had stopped whispering. Now they just watched Asher out of the corners of their eyes, like men who'd found a wolf among dogs and weren't sure if it would bite or lead them home. That night, Jonah confronted him. He waited until the others were asleep, until the small dugout was reduced to quiet breathing and shifting weight. The candle flickered between them. Jonah's hand shook, but he held it steady. "You're not from here," he said. Asher said nothing. "I mean, not from now. You draw things that haven't happened yet. I've seen them. That city burning London you wrote. 1940. That's after this war. It's 1916. One of them held something, a metal rod, long and smooth. No trigger, no magazine. What's this?" Jonah whispered. Asher answered, "That's after the next war. Or throw the sketchbook into the fire." But he didn't, because deep inside, something told him the drawings were real. More real than the ground under his boots. "Who are you?" he asked. Asher paused, then said, "I remember the future. Men scrambled for masks, yanked on filters, cursed and shoved." Jonah grabbed his own and turned, but Asher was already pulling his over, calm as a priest. And then Jonah saw it again. That flicker, not in the sky, not on the ground, in his mind. A sudden image, clear as glass. A city, not London, not Berlin, but something unfamiliar. Glass towers, jets streaking through the sky, sirens, faces illuminated by screens, and over it all, fire. Jonah gasped, the mask pressed to his mouth, heart hammering against his ribs. The moment passed, the gas drifted harmlessly past the trench, carried by the wind. No casualties. But Jonah knew something had shifted, in him, around him, and most of all in Asher's eyes. Because those eyes no longer looked like they belonged to a man, they looked like they'd seen the end. The morning after the gas drifted past, the trench was quieter than usual. Not the uneasy silence of men waiting for orders, nor the dread thick hush before a barrage bet, something colder. Still as grave soil. Jonah Elwood sat alone on a crate near the mess, eyes distant, hands folded like a man in church. His tin of beans sat untouched beside him, steam curling lazily into the damp morning air. He had not spoken a word since the gas passed over them. Not to Harding, not to the lieutenant, not even to Asher, because he had seen something. Not a hallucination, he was sure of that. It had struck him with a clarity no dream ever managed. A city, not from this world, or this time. A city so clean and violent it felt like prophecy. And he knew, instinctively, that Asher had something to do with it. That night, it got worse. Around 2 a.m., the trench rumbled. Not from artillery, no explosions, just a low, sustained vibration as though the earth itself was humming beneath their boots. Jonah was on guard, shift when it began. He pressed his hand to the trench wall, felt it tremble like an old man's breath. Then a sound, faint at first, a kind of whimpering. It came from the far end of the trench, near the southern fire step right, where Jonah had first found the strange drawing. A single lantern still burned there, casting wild shadows against the boards. He approached slowly, rifle ready. "Who's there?" He called out. No answer. He turned the corner and stopped. The trench wall had partially collapsed. Clay, timber, and sodden earth slumped inward like a mouth opened mid-scream. A narrow cavity had opened behind the wall just big enough to crawl through. Jonah hesitated. Then, against every instinct in his body, he lowered his rifle, dropped to his knees, and crawled in. Inside, it was darker than pitch. He felt more than saw the shape of the chamber timbers lining the walls, older than the current trench, slick with mildew. Some lost catacomb from the last war, perhaps older still. His fingers brushed paper, a stack of it, dozens of sheets, bound together by string. He pulled it toward the light. Sketches, pages of them, more cities, different angles, aircraft that made no sound, soldiers in uniforms that bore no insignia, but all carried the same expression, blank, obedient, inhuman. One page showed a flag Jonah didn't recognize, red, with a black mark shaped like a claw or a wheel. Another showed a group of children staring up at a drone, a long-winged thing shaped like a knife, hovering above them. At the bottom of that page, written in the same spidery hand, smoke curling from its top, twin plumes like black wings. A caption beneath, tiny and clean. No one else had felt the tremor, but something had called him to that chamber. Something had shown him those drawings. Back in the dugout, Jonah laid the pages out beneath his blanket, using a stolen candle to study them. Each one was more detailed than the last. Some contained diagrams, blueprints. Even one showed what appeared to be a circuit board labeled Norden Bomb Site, 1943. Another depicted a human silhouette, surrounded by radiating waves, labeled in tight script, First Microwave Pulse Weapon, Test Alaska, 2027. One drawing stood out. It was simple, charcoal again. A trench, viewed from above. It looked just like C9. His trench, in the middle, a small cross-section, labeled in precise ink. Point of fracture, the 15th of August 1916. 100 questions clawed at him, but none more urgent than this. One man said he heard a voice humming in the fog, but no one believed him. Jonah kept the drawings hidden, but that night he took them out again and flipped to the very last page. It was blank, except for a date. The 22nd of September 1939. Orders came and went like wind, meaningless, until someone bled because of them. But in trench C9, under its saturated timbers and whispered rumors, something far stranger had been unearthed than any mine or ordnance. Jonah Elwood stopped eating. He still moved, still performed his duties, but his eyes had changed. They darted too much, then lingered too long. When men spoke to him, he nodded, but didn't hear them. His mind, unstuck by what he'd seen, had begun to detach from the soil of 1916. It was Harding who noticed first. Something's clawing at that lad, the corporal muttered to Lieutenant Marcus over tea. Marcus sipped slowly, his eyes narrowed against the morning fog. It's clawing at all of us, Corporal, not outside, but somewhere behind his ears. A low, constant thrum, like static from a damaged wireless. It wasn't language he could pass, not exactly, but it had cadence, rhythm, emotion, and it got louder when he touched the drawings. Late on the evening of August 14th, he returned to the small cavity he'd found behind the trench wall, the hidden space no one else had discovered, or maybe refused to. The entry was slightly wider now. The soil had shifted, collapsed further inward, as if the trench itself had grown weary of keeping secrets. He entered without hesitation. Inside, the air felt stale but expectant, like lungs holding breath. And on the wall opposite the entrance, newly exposed by the crumbling earth, Jonah saw something that hadn't been there before. Another drawing. But this one wasn't paper. It was etched directly into the timber, carved with the precision of a draftsman, not a soldier. Deep black lines in a polished wooden surface, like an altar. The image was horrifying in its serenity. Rows of bodies, hundreds of them, stacked with geometric precision across a vast concrete yard. Not soldiers, but civilians. Men, women, children. All naked, all still. In the background, smokestacks. Above them, snow falling gently, like dust. And at the very bottom, barely legible in the low light, a satchel. Inside were more sketches, not bundled, not stored, but discarded, as if left behind by someone no longer needing them. Each was worse than the last. One showed a Bombay opening over a sleeping city. Beneath it, a name, Dresden. The weight of the images pressed in on him, as if the trench itself had grown heavy with unborn screams. He had to get out, but something stopped him. A faint glimmer at the base of the carved panel. He reached down and pulled free a rusted tin box. The kind used for biscuits, standard army issue. His own mother had sent him one back in February, filled with hard toffee and a crumpled letter written with trembling hands. He opened this box. Inside, a notebook. He knew it before he even opened it. Knew by the crisp feel of the paper, the charcoal dust smudging the inner lid, the faint scent of burnt wood and iron. It was Asher's no name on the front, just a symbol, 3 concentric circles. Inside them, a triangle, and inside that, a dot. He opened to the first page. No sketch, just text. The drawings are not visions, they are memory. Self-driving cars, a military checkpoint at a crosswalk, where civilians in reflective face masks waited to pass. Then the next, a jet with no cockpit, labeled XQ58A, 2030. Then, a group of soldiers kneeling around a strange device, a small black cube, glowing faintly. One soldier held up a hand to block the light. The label read, Recovered Artifact, Pyongyang, 2038. These weren't random sketches. They were warnings, a record, a prophecy in charcoal. And yet, as he paged through the notebook, another realization chilled him more than any prediction. Their uniforms were standard issue, except for one detail, the shoulder patches. Harding had brought one back. He held it out to Jonah without a word. Jonah stared. A red circle, a black eagle, stylized, brutal. Beneath it, 2 digits stitched in silver thread, 1940, like he knew something we didn't. Just silence, and out beyond the wire barely visible figures. Not running, not hiding, just standing, watching. Jonah kept the notebook clutched tight against his chest, and in the darkness, for the first time since Asher vanished, he began to draw. Jonah's hand trembled as he drew. Not from cold, the trench was always cold, but from something deeper, older, like some ancient whisper had slipped beneath his skin and guided his pencil with invisible fingers. The lines came with ease, like memory recalled, not imagined. He didn't plan what he was drawing. He simply obeyed the pull. A skyline took shape, one he had never seen with his waking eyes. Glass towers, curved roads with no visible seams, and people, so many people walking in silence. Faces slack, eyes unfocused. In their hands, small glowing rectangles. Their eyes never left the light. On the ground, in bold red letters. And yet, when the fog pressed close again that night, and the trench seemed to shrink around him like a noose pulling tighter, he knew the drawing hadn't come from him. It had come through him. Harding came by around midnight, gruff and chewing on something that might have once been tobacco. He noticed the paper, the black-stained fingertips. "You still on about those bloody drawings?" he asked. Jonah tucked the sketch away, too late. Harding had already seen the image. He paused, his jaw worked side to side. Then, softer, "That's not here, is it? Just thought you ought to know." There was a word stenciled on the inside in crisp, clean type. That evening, a new arrival was brought into C9, man in a black officer's coat, face pale and clean-shaven, hair slicked neatly beneath a flat cap. His insignia was unfamiliar, but his orders were stamped with the War Office seal. He introduced himself as Captain Leland Sachs, Royal Engineers, though something about his voice betrayed him. Too polished, too crisp, like someone pretending to belong here. Jonah watched him disembark from the jeep and step into the trench, with an expression not of fatigue or disdain, but calculation, as if he was measuring the trench, not for military readiness, but for something else entirely. Sachs called an immediate assembly, all hands. He stood on the fire step like a preacher on a pulpit and read from a small black notebook. Effective immediately, this sector C9 is under direct observation by the Crown's War Research Division. You will answer questions when asked. You will not speak of recent anomalies. Any found documenting or retaining materials outside approved orders will be detained under Article 12. That night, Jonah saw Sachs in the officer's dugout, poring over maps, but not of the trench knot, even of France. They were city maps, global, future dates scrawled along the borders. One read, Seattle, 2029, First Water Siege. His charcoal pencil gone. The most recent drawing, Shanghai, vanished, but beneath his blanket, something new had been placed. A single page, handwritten. "We've seen your work. Continue. Draw as much as you can. You're not the first. You won't be the last." Out beyond the trench, The fog had begun to rise again, but this time it didn't feel like weather. It felt like a curtain being drawn, and on the other side of it, things were beginning to move. Jonah began drawing again, not out of compulsion now, but necessity, because when he stopped, the dreams returned. Not dreams, really. Flashbacks from a life he hadn't lived yet. He'd wake up gasping from smoke, the heat of invisible fires blistering his throat, the screams of children speaking languages he didn't know echoing inside his skull. Then he'd look down and find black graphite dust on his fingers, even if he hadn't picked up a pencil in days. So he obeyed. He drew. The latest page showed a desert again, but this time it was paved in concrete, ringed with walls topped in razor wire. Watchtowers shaped like needles pierced a sky that burned orange, not from sunset, but from firestorms in the distance. Drones drifted overhead like flies, and beneath them, a line of people marched single file into a doorway marked Processing Unit 19B. No date this time, no place, only a word scrawled across the bottom in thick, shaking strokes. Captain Sachs had turned one corner of the trench into what he called the staging area. 2 tents, 4 guards, a radio wired into a makeshift generator that hummed with a low warbling whine. He'd brought in a steel cabinet that clicked and buzzed at odd intervals, like it was breathing in code. He called Jonah to the tent on the 3rd night. There was no offer of tea, no pleasantries, just a clipboard placed silently in front of him. Jonah read the top line, "I'm drawing what I see," tried to erase the loop, but as Jonah reached the flap of the tent, the captain said one last thing. It felt like a reprieve. It wasn't. At precisely 7:43, a deep shudder ran through Trench C9. The ground heaved, groaned, then gave way near the south end. Earth folded inward like fabric. Sandbags flew. Screams followed. Jonah, already watching the southern wall, ran toward the collapse as Harding shouted behind him. At the breach, a black void yawned beneath the churned clay, too perfect to be natural. Circular, reinforced with beams and a spiral staircase leading down metal, not wood, prefabricated, built not in 1916, but long after. He stared. This wasn't a trench structure. It was a facility. He heard Sachs's voice behind him. "It's open. Good. You'll open this when you reach the platform." Tinged, marked with a single symbol, but not as it was in 1916, not even 1940. This was London in ruin. Buildings blackened, bridges shattered, air thick with smoke. Sirens blared in the distance, but no one moved. The streets were empty. The Thames had swelled and overflowed, swallowing the embankments. A dirigible lay torn across the Tower Bridge like a flayed carcass. On a nearby rooftop, a man in black turned toward him. Asher, older now, thinner but unmistakable. He raised one hand, not to wave, to warn. Jonah stumbled back from the window, heart hammering. His mind reeled with questions, but only one stuck. The moment the door locked behind him, a subtle vibration pulsed through the floor, like something vast and distant had just shifted into gear. He staggered back from the viewing window, sweat cooling on his neck. His heart hadn't slowed. Asher's face, older, leaner, more lined, lingered in his mind, like an afterimage burned into the eye. The gesture he'd made from the rooftop wasn't friendly. It was urgent, a warning, as if even here, especially here, Jonah didn't belong. He turned, scanning the chamber. There were machines on the far wall, sleek, paneled, humming softly. Lights blinked in no apparent pattern. One console had a flat surface covered in symbols, some Latin, others angular, alien. A single line of text pulsed across its top. A hiss from the far end made him spin. A panel in the wall retracted with mechanical ease, revealing a narrow hallway bathed in low red light. At its end, another door. Not a choice. A path. He moved. The hallway narrowed. Pipes lined the ceiling. Soft tones rang out every 10 steps, like a countdown. The further he went, the louder a distant hum became. Not machine hum. Something lower, organic, like a turbine crossed with breathing. The next door was open. He stepped through and froze. The room was circular, dome-like. Every inch of the walls was covered in sketches, not hung, but embedded, like wallpaper made from prophecy. They overlapped and curled, hundreds deep in places, layered like sediment. Cities burning, armies marching, floods swallowing metropolises. People gathered in windowless rooms beneath irradiated skies. And in the center, a table, a chair, a man. Back to him, drawing. Jonah's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The figure turned slightly, enough to speak, but not to reveal his face. "You made it," the man said. Jonah stepped closer. "Are you?" 1,000-yard stare with no end behind it. "Do you understand now?" the older Jonah asked. "No," the younger one whispered, "not even close. And there'll be 5 after. You're not chosen. You're just next. The world that comes after the last war. The world we tried to stop. The one they built instead. It only resets." Another door hissed open on the far side of the room, leading down into a shaft filled with smoke and blinking blue lights. "I have to go," the elder Jonah said. "Your loop starts now. Before you, Gasher, was he like us?" The corridor narrowed as Jonah descended, each step lit by embedded floor panels that pulsed like a heartbeat. Blue-white, a rhythm not of war, but of containment. There was no dust, no scent of earth, no sound but his own breathing, until there was. A whirlow and deliberate, like clockwork teeth grinding in a cathedral bell tower. At the base of the shaft, the passage widened again, ending in a chamber so stark it felt surgical. Clean walls, cold lighting, a single rectangular table at the center, bolted to the floor. And behind it, one of them spoke. "You have been observed," the voice said, neutral, genderless, like air moving through stone. Jonah's throat tightened. He didn't speak. "You were the 7th Elwood to reach this chamber," the voice continued. "None have yet passed through. To return," the voice said, "or to remember, or decline. A seed to carry through time, to bloom in someone else's century." He looked down at his hands, still black-stained, still trembling. He had already been chosen long before he saw the drawings, before Asher, before the trench, perhaps before he was even born. "I can't do this," he whispered. "You will," the voice said. Not cruelly, not angrily, just certain. And with a low mechanical click, the cube levitated from the slot and hovered toward him. It pulsed faster now, like it knew. Jonah's knees buckled. He felt a rush like falling through memory, like the world narrowing into a pinhole, then exploding outward. But they didn't look at him, not really. Their eyes were lost in the glow of retinal displays. Subdermal implants flickered beneath their skin like fireflies, and everywhere soldiers not human, not quite. Synthetic bodies in black armor, bearing rifles that whispered to themselves when idle. Patrolling streets that were too clean, too silent. Then he turned a corner. A mural half-faded, half-scrubbed from a crumbling wall. It showed a hand holding charcoal, a city in ruin, a caption beneath it. Why not someone smarter, braver, more useful? Or the loop breaks prematurely. No stairs, just roots and clay. The medic pulled him up. "You've been out cold since the collapse. Christ, thought you were buried for good." Rain blurred the trench into watercolor blotches of brown and gray, bleeding into each other as men shouted through the din, struggling to stabilize the collapsed southern wall. Jonah stood to one side, staring blankly at the ground as muck swallowed his boots. The medic had left him with a brief nod and a canteen of cold tea. No one pressed for answers. In war, the line between concussion and catatonia was thin and best left uncrossed. He watched Harding direct the diggers, barking orders with the force of a man trying to keep the universe from cracking apart. Lieutenant Marcus approached from the dugout, his uniform streaked with blood, not his own. A bandage peeked beneath his collar, hastily applied. He looked at Jonah for a long while before speaking. "We'll say you were caught under the timbers, knocked clean out, found you breathing, so we left it at that. You understand me?" Marcus narrowed his eyes. "I asked if you understand, like it or not." His notebook rested on his chest, rising and falling with each breath. He hadn't drawn since the chamber, not by choice. He simply couldn't. His fingers hovered over the page, but the lines wouldn't come. Not cities, not ruins, not futures, only static. He thought back to the phrase, to remember enough to draw, and forget enough to survive. Was this part of it? The forgetting. Harding entered just before dawn, face pale, clothes soaked. "You need to see this," he said, not waiting for an answer. Jonah followed him without speaking. They made their way to the forward edge of the trench, where a small observation slit faced no man's land. Harding handed him a pair of binoculars. "Look near the tree stump," he said. Jonah raised the glasses, and froze. It was a man, no, a figure standing motionless in the distance. Too far to make out details, but the silhouette was unmistakable. Tall, thin, still as death. A long coat, a cap, Something strapped across his back, maybe a roll, maybe something longer. Harding whispered, "Been there for an hour. Doesn't move, doesn't flinch. This is part of it," he said, more to himself than Harding. "He's not gone. He's showing us something." And finally his hand began to move. The pencil skated across the paper like it had been waiting, as though the ink in his veins had unclotted. The figure, the fog, the book, and something behind it all are shape, almost hidden. A gate, circular, metallic, embedded in the earth behind the silhouette, half buried, like the edge of a coin in soil. He hadn't seen it with his eyes, but now it was there on the page, perfectly rendered. Harding peered over his shoulder. That wasn't there, just like the ones before him. Lieutenant Marcus handed Jonah his reassignment packet without ceremony. His new post EPRA, Frontline Intelligence Liaison. "I didn't ask for this," Jonah said. Marcus looked at him. "He didn't need to. They want me to recuperate, as if he can unsee things." The trench was already being buried by engineers in silence. No one spoke, no one saluted, no one remembered, except him. The road to Ypres was a scar. Burnt-out fields, shattered trees like jagged teeth, craters flooded with chemical green water. Carts laden with amputees passed in the opposite direction, their silence louder than the groaning engines. Jonah rode in the back of a troop truck, notebook clutched tight beneath his coat. The charcoal pencil tapped against his ribs with every jolt of the wheels, as if eager to be used again. But he didn't draw. Not yet. Around him, new faces stared into nothing. Men too young to shave, and men too old to be here. All of them hollowed. There was a kind of solidarity in their shared vacancy, like the silence between survivors of a wreck who haven't yet figured out if they're dead. Ypres itself was worse than he remembered. The town had become a mask of its former self, his burned out, mouth pulled open in a permanent bombed-out scream. Buildings sagged like drunks clinging to one another for support. The cathedral had lost its spire. Now it pointed only at ghosts. Jonah was stationed at a forward relay post, little more than a half-buried shack strung with wire and soaked in rot. His job was simple: intercept German signals, transcribe code, pass along what made sense. But few transmissions ever came through. Instead, it was the static that haunted him. Every night, through the headphone receiver, it returned. Not noise, not patterns, a low presence, like someone breathing on the other side of the signal, waiting. One night, unable to sleep, he listened longer than usual, and beneath the static, faint and warbling, he heard words, not spoken, transmitted, a whisper in rhythm. He labeled it Threshold Event, 2056. Before they turned to go, one of them said, he began sketching machines too large to exist, spirals embedded in mountains, gears beneath oceans, antennae stretching skyward from hollowed-out moons. One showed an entire city wrapped around a satellite. At its center, a throne. On it, a man with no eyes, hands raised, mouth open in silent command. He wrote nothing beneath that image. He couldn't. Each night, the dreams grew worse. He wandered cities of silence, watched skies bloom with unfamiliar stars. In one vision, he stood before a library carved into the bones of a leviathan, each rib a shelf, each tooth a coded volume. Every book had the same title. We tried. The ash didn't scatter. It clung to his fingers like guilt. Jonah began limiting the time he spent with the notebook. He no longer trusted it. It felt less like a journal, more like a mouth something hungry and speaking when it should be silent. Lieutenant Marcus wrote him once, a single postcard, from London. It read, just the same symbol, scratched faintly in the corner. The remaining stones were moss-covered, carved with pockmarks that looked almost like symbols, not religious, mathematical. He traced one with his fingertip. It vibrated. Inside, he found a room untouched by war, circular, small, and on the wall a mural, charcoal, old, but unmistakable. It was the gate again, not the one he had drawn, but another variation, older, cruder. Figures emerged from it cloaked, faceless, and in the corner of the image, a boy, charcoal-stained hands, eyes wide, watching. Jonah didn't move, didn't breathe. He sat down in the center of the room, notebook open, pencil ready, and began to draw again. This time, not because he had to, but because he understood. The war was not the story, it was the stage. The play was older, the actors eternal. He was just another scribe in an infinite archive, and he would write until the page ran out. The first thing he noticed when he woke up was the silence. not the hush of peace, but the absolute absence of war. No shells, no boots, no wind even. Just a ringing stillness, like the world had taken a breath and forgotten how to let it go. Jonah blinked in the morning light that filtered through the shattered rose window of the ruined monastery. It painted fractured reds and golds across the stone floor, casting strange shapes over the mural shapes that moved, even though the sun remained fixed. He looked down. The notebook lay open beside him, pages full, drawings he didn't remember making. Cities turned to bone, oceans split in half like peeled fruit, a clock tower rising from the sea with no hands on its face, and everywhere, the gate. It was no longer just an image, it had become a recurring presence, like a character always just off stage. He turned to the last page, a single line of text, written in ink instead of charcoal, like something had settled inside it during the night, something old and not entirely his. He stepped outside into a grey, windless dawn. The countryside was veiled in fog again. Of course it was, but not natural fog. This time he knew better. This was the curtain, and it was thinner here. He made his way to the cliff's edge behind the monastery, where the land fell away to a narrow beach below. There, half buried in the sand, lay another gate, not the same as in the drawings, not as large, not glowing, but real, steel, scarred, covered in moss and rust, like it had been exiled here long ago. A perfect circle, 4 meters in diameter, flat as a coin pressed into the world's flesh. Jonah stood over it, heart thudding. There was no question of if he should open it, only how. As he circled it, he noticed grooves along the rim, familiar ones. They matched the layout from one of his earliest drawings, the gate's interface. He reached into his coat and removed the pencil Marcus had given him, the one that was too new. It fit the grooves perfectly. He hesitated only a second, then twisted. A deep, grinding click echoed through the cliffs. The ground rumbled beneath him, and slowly, the gate began to sink. Dust and sand fell away like powdered bones. The metal spiraled open like the iris of a camera. Darkness gaped beneath. Jonah crouched at the edge. He expected heat, pressure, radiation. Instead, cold wind and the smell of cedar. He climbed down. Others wore clothes Jonah didn't recognize, all suits with no seams, visors for eyes. And halfway down the passage, he saw his own face. There was no mistaking it. Same furrow in the brow. Same left side scar, given to him by shrapnel weeks ago, carved in stone, a part of the archive. He walked on, heart thundering. At the end of the tunnel stood a heavy wooden door, ancient and swollen with age. Carved above it, in Latin, he turned the page and found the next image, one he hadn't drawn yet. It showed a burning field, a flag of a country that didn't yet exist, a new kind of soldier armored in hexagonal plating, with rifles that hummed. And at the center, the gate open, with people streaming through it, some fleeing, some chasing. He turned another page. It showed a man, his back to the viewer, standing on a shore, watching the world collapse into flame. And in the sky, a phrase written in ash: "You are not the first. No one's done that before. From places even we don't name, you'll draw them to, because someone must." By the time Jonah resurfaced, the cliffs had become liquid, muddy veins of earth, slicked to a sheen by relentless wind. He climbed out of the sunken gate like a man reborn, soaked to the bone. The clean notebook clutched inside his jacket as if it could dissolve in rainwater. Behind him, the gate resealed its iris, twisting shut with a hiss of finality. The metal vanished beneath the wet sand, erasing all trace of passage. He stood still for a long time, letting the storm soak him. Each droplet thudded like punctuation against skin that no longer felt entirely his. Above, gulls circled, not cawing, just gliding in slow, unsettling spirals. He didn't feel cold. That frightened him more than anything. He walked inland, back toward what passed for civilization. A bombed-out barn gave shelter for the night, the wind howling through its broken ribs like a choir of ghosts. There, by guttering lantern light, he opened the new notebook. The first page was blank. The second page was not. There, in his own hand, but with ink dried long before he received the book, was a message, as if she'd been consecrated by knowledge too vast for scripture. He wrote nothing that night, but he dreamt. This time the gate opened onto nothing. A void, not black, not dark, just missing, a room-shaped absence that swallowed all it touched. In the dream, he stood at the edge with others, some wearing uniforms, others robes, still others naked as birth-hand. All of them held notebooks, and one by one, they dropped their books into the absence. None of them made a sound when they did, but Jonah didn't let go. He clutched his close, even as the absence reached for his feet. When he woke, his hands were sore from gripping the notebook in his sleep. He functioned within it, but no longer belonged to it. He was an observer now, an archivist embedded within chaos. At his next post, the men avoided him. Some whispered about the painter-scribe, the one who stared too long at horizon fog and muttered in his sleep. One private claimed he saw Jonah sketch something the day before it happened, howitzer strike. Precisely placed, killing 3 officers. No one questioned it aloud. Jonah didn't care. He spent his days transcribing ciphered code, and his nights in the farthest corner of the dugout, head bowed over the notebook. The new one. The decision book, as he'd come to think of it. It resisted him at first. Pages remained stubbornly blank, no matter how many images he tried to conjure. Only once he stopped forcing it, stopped thinking like a war artist did it, respond. The first accepted sketch came during a moment of quiet. He had stood at the edge of a flooded trench, watching ripples spread across the oily water. In those reflections, he saw something impossible. They never answered directly, but sometimes the responses came days later, embedded in new images. One sketch of a cathedral floating upside down in orbit was followed by a note. He approached the field phone, lifting the receiver. Before he could speak, a voice snapped into his ear, too clear, too cold. You are accelerating recursion. Stop drawing. Purge, censor, destroy. Below the image, another note. All of them sketch in the gate. Jonah stared for a long time. Then, slowly, he picked up his pencil and wrote beneath the image, and in its place, he began a third book. Empty pages, ordinary pencil, no symbols, no guidance. This one was for them, the ones who would follow, because he now believed what the voices feared. He left behind his boots, placed neatly beside the dugout stove. A man's boots are sacred out here, no one would steal them. Only ghosts walk barefoot into fog. It was enough to confuse command. They logged him as Mia, possibly lost during a nighttime raid, possibly defected, possibly buried alive beneath a shift in mud and mortar. He became a footnote in someone else's ledger, a crossed-out name in a long column of lost ones. He had never belonged on any list anyway. By mid-morning he was deep behind the lines, dressed in civilian clothes, scavenged from a corpse found near a crumbled farmhouse. He didn't feel guilt, not anymore. Whoever the man had been, his soul was gone. The jacket, patched and faded, fit snugly. From then on, he was just another refugee on the edge of a continent burning itself alive. He walked for days, heading east at first, then veering north, past abandoned towns, through forests charred at the edges, over bridges where only crows remained to witness him. He made camp in ruined churches, in drained canals, beneath collapsed train cars. No one stopped him, not soldiers, not civilians. They all saw something in his eyes that told them to look away. And all the while, he kept the third notebook close empty, but no longer untouched. He had begun writing in it not drawings, but instructions, messages addressed to no one in particular, or perhaps to everyone who might one day find it. The first page read, "You know, the archive." Before language got all technological, before truth became something with a barcode, even if it fractures the air around you, every truth etched onto its pages became seed, grew into echo, returned, sharpened. It was no longer just a record, it was a weapon. One woman showed him a sketch she'd made in 1903, a building glass-walled, steel-spined, 40 stories high. She said it hadn't existed then, but last week, she told him, eyes fierce, I saw it in Paris, exactly as I drew it, brick for brick. They spoke in symbols. They called their mission many things, the continuity, the grey ink, the covenant of pages. Jonah gave it no name. He didn't need one. He only needed the next page, just an outline in empty country bordered by numbers. This is where it's starting again, the man said. Not the war. He felt the weight of everything, of drawings, still unmade, of gates, still unopened, of names still unsaid, and he nodded. He would go, because someone had to draw the beginning before anyone else could imagine the end. He crossed the border with no name at dusk. It wasn't marked by fences or signs, but he knew the moment he stepped across the air changed. Lighter somehow, not cleaner, but thinner, like a veil had been lifted, as if reality were looser here, unstitched at the seams. Even his footsteps sounded different, less solid, more echo than impact. The map had led him to what had once been a village. The remains were skeletal crumbling chimneys, staircases leading to nowhere, windows without frames. Yet the town had not been bombed. It had simply faded, weathered out of existence like a photograph left too long in sunlight. And at the village center, just beneath the curve of a dried-up well, he found it. A door, not a gate, not a shaft. A simple wooden door, unconnected to any structure, standing upright in the field as if it had grown from the earth like a tree. He circled it once, twice. On the third pass, he noticed something faint, carved at shoulder height into the wood. So much he could forget if this door demanded it. Would it take Ash's voice, Harding's laugh, the woman's ink-dark eyes in the archive, or worse, would it take the gate itself from his mind? He closed the book, set it down gently on the grass, then opened the door. No wind, no thunder, just ... quiet, and a hallway. Unlit, narrow, sloped slightly downward. He stepped in. That gave way to something more primitive: walls, shaped not by hand, but by intention, as though the passage had been willed into being by thought alone. Jonah walked on. The air grew thick, not with moisture but with presence, like the weight of time had settled here, compressing centuries into scent and stillness. Then he heard it, not footsteps, not voices, scratching, a sound like charcoal on parchment, sharp, deliberate, repetitive. He turned a final corner and entered a vast circular chamber. The source of the sound stood at its center, a dozen figures hunched over desks, each sketching furiously in the half-dark. Men, women, children, even each, lit by a flickering orb of blue light hovering above their workspace. None of them looked up as he entered, and surrounding them, lining the walls, reaching up into the dark like an unending staircase, were shelves, not of books, of drawings, loose-leaf, rolled, folded, preserved in thin sheets of glass. Jonah stepped closer. The drawings were dated 11,508 BCE. He pulled one at random. It showed fire raining from a three-moon sky. Below, a city burned, a city not made by any known culture, with circular towers and roads shaped like sptoebs. Another sketch, a creature, unnameable, not monstrous, elegant, part animal, part machine, part prayer. Its gaze locked with his, even through the glass. He stepped back, trembling. Then one of the sketches turned. A girl, no older than 13. Her eyes glowed faintly, as though backlit by stars. She looked at Jonah with solemn recognition. "You're late," she said. "I didn't know I was expected. Much older." That's where the real stories live. Each line revealed something he had once glimpsed in dream, or in the corner of someone else's eye. Futures collided on the page, some terrible, some transcendent. One drawing showed a world with no language, only color. Another showed a courtroom where ancestors judged the living. Another, an entire city built inside a glacier, its heat derived from humming towers shaped like cathedrals. He spoke little, but he listened, and the chamber taught him its final truth. It repeated because it wasn't done teaching yet. Jonah kept drawing, because this, now, was his war, not of guns, not of borders, but of story, and the silence that would fill the world if stories stopped. Time fractured around him, but the lines held. Jonah lost track of how long he stayed in the chamber. The drawings blurred into one another, not for lack of clarity, but because they no longer obeyed chronology. One sketch led into the next, like thoughts unfolding without tether, civilizations flickering into being and fading again. Battles that hadn't happened yet, described with the intimacy of diary entries. Faces he'd never seen sketched with the affection of old friends. He wasn't the only one affected. The other scribes' silent, steady eyes full of stars seemed to sense the shift too. They no longer looked at him as the newcomer. Instead, they began to pass him pages, half hesitant. "Finish it," one said, sliding over a crude pencil sketch of a tunnel splitting a mountain. "Write the outcome," said another, gesturing to a drawing of a child holding two keys, one gold, one bone. They had seen in him what he still hadn't fully accepted. Not a prophet, not a seer, but a synthesizer. He didn't just record, he resolved. The gate was no longer a mystery. It had become a motif, a structural constant in every age, appearing in different guises, as a ritual circle in Neolithic stone. as a Gothic arch in ruined cathedrals, as the curve of a VR visor in 4 or 5 decades. The form changed, but the function, always the same. Transition, thresholds between eras, portals between selves. And Jonah, for reasons he no longer questioned, was one of its chosen recorders. One night of night still held meaning in a place with no sun. He was woken by sound, not footsteps, not voices, breathing. He opened his eyes and found a man standing at the edge of his desk, tall, thin, wearing a coat that shimmered oddly, stitched with fibers that caught no light. His face was familiar, too familiar. Jonah sat up slowly. It was him, older, hardened, eyes dulled by what he had seen, but unmistakably himself. The older Jonah said nothing at first, just placed a hand on the desk and waited. Then finally, "I thought you might need this, but it is yours to deliver." One of the children stopped drawing and whispered, "It's time." The second notebook, the decision book, remained buried back near the Belgian line, but the third came with him, wrapped in thick cloth, tied with twine soaked in charcoal ink. Before leaving, he paused at one of the chamber's walls. There, etched into the stone, were names, not carved with pride, not centered, just ... there. A list of every known archivist, inscribed by those who had come after. Jonah found his own name, already present, J. Elwood, 1916. He added nothing, just touched the stone. It felt warm. The journey was long, but the land gave way easily. No animals, no trees, just the sense of being watched by memory itself. Eventually, he reached a structure, a dome half buried, grown over with vines that shimmered faintly in the auroral glow. The doors were open, waiting. Inside, silence, and a single pedestal. On it, a box. He recognized it instantly. War Research Unit, Temporal Field Division. He opened it. Inside, perfectly preserved, his first notebook, the one from C9. The charcoal cover, the dog-eared pages. It had returned, or been waiting. And tucked within it, a final message, typed, clean. "You are not the last, but you are the hinge. Deliver the sketch, then forget." Not free of war, but aware, built by those who remembered. He drew until his hands ached, until the pencil was worn to a nub. When he finished, he folded the paper, placed it inside the box, and closed it. Wrapped in layers of cloth, eyes wide, holding the decision book, they said nothing, just offered it to him. Jonah took it with a nod. The child turned, walked into the aurora-lit horizon. Gone. Jonah sat in the grass for a long time, then opened the notebook. One new sentence had been added. Now it bends. No landmarks guided him, only instinct. That strange inner compass wired now to something far deeper than geography. And memory. Memory shaped the landscape. He could feel it. The closer he came to what had been real, the more the uncanny faded. The trembling grasses became roads of rutted mud. The sky dulled to drizzle, and the air reeked once again of powder and blood. By the time he reached the edge of the Western Front, he was back in the war. The same war, but not the same man. He no longer belonged to this time. He wore it like a coat that no longer fit. Soldiers passed him without recognition. Generals ignored him. And the war, impossibly loud, brutally intimate, pressed forward, without noticing the man who had once drawn its heartbeat. He slipped into the ruins of Ypres, now half collapsed, full of ghosts. There, in a crumbled abbey's side chapel, he found what he was looking for. The child, not the same as before, not the courier from the auroral plains. This one was local, thin, pale, soot-smudged, a war orphan perhaps, or just another consequence given legs. She sat beneath a shattered stained glass panel, sketching in the dirt with a piece of broken slate. Jonah watched her for a long time. She was drawing a bird, not a dove, not a crow, something between. Wings like parchment, eyes like fireflies. She didn't look up when she spoke. "You left the book." Behind her, half buried in rubble, was the notebook. The original, his. He approached carefully, brushing ash from the cover. It was charred at the edges, but intact. The pages inside, some crumpled, some smudged, still bore his hand. The trench, Asher, the gate, the mural. He flipped to the final page. Someone else had added to it, not in words, in image. A sketch of the child in the chapel, drawing a bird. Exactly what he now saw. The recursion, folding again. Jonah knelt. "Did you draw this?" A people who wrote history in sketches, not decrees. He drew. When he was finished, she studied it carefully, then nodded. Good, that one's important. He pulled out the decision book, the third one. Pages still empty, except for the few messages that appeared without his hand. One had just arrived. Fresh ink, still damp. Prepare the message. Deliver it to the next hinge. Carefully, intentionally. This wasn't about art. It was about binding. He had learned that in the chamber. Every sketch was a stake in time. Every repetition, another nail in the structure of memory. To copy it here meant anchoring it, fixing it to the recursion, so it couldn't slip through again. It took hours, and when he was finished, the book shifted, not physically, just perceptibly, as if the very idea of it had grown heavier. He closed it, and on the cover, scrawled faintly, a new phrase appeared, and that he'd become a courier again, this time not of art, but of continuity. Each town he passed offered possibilities. In one, he saw a nurse who painted watercolors of the dead to send home to their families. In another, a shell-shocked boy who scrawled symbols into the dirt with his fingers, muttering sequences that made no sense till Jonah realized they were dates, far future dates, but none of them were the hinge. He would know when he found them. That's what the child had said. Good, that one's important, because someone always would. She handed him a second drawing. This time, a man, older, drawing by firelight under the broken roof of an abbey. Him, and in her hand, she held a fragment of slate. The recursion bends, she whispered. Now it needs to bloom. Camille had made camp inside the wreckage of what had once been a grand hall, columns, now broken, frescoes scorched black by artillery. But the bones of knowledge still lingered in the walls, in the echo of footsteps that had once walked there to learn, to teach, to remember. She had laid out her drawings carefully on the stone floor, like offerings, each one meticulously rendered, each one impossible. One showed a towering machine shaped like a spine, its vertebrae ticking like gears. Another, a boy with no eyes, reading from a book that bled light. And another, still a sketch of Jonah himself, but older, frailer, surrounded by sketches torn from time, whispering to a child holding a charcoal stick like a sword. He stared at that one longest. "You've been seeing these since when?" he asked. "Since the bombs," she replied. "Since my mother died." She unwrapped a cloth from her bag, revealing a smaller notebook, hand-bound rough leather, edges burned. "The others call me mad," she said, "but you know the recursion is real. Your proof." Inside it, a single page, a sketch of her. Jonah looked at her in silence for a long moment, then reached into his coat and pulled out the third notebook, the decision book, the weapon, the witness. He placed it in front of her. "This is yours now," he said. She didn't touch it. "Why me?" "But I don't understand it." It pulsed faintly in her hands. Jonah felt the weight lift from his chest. Not guilt, not fear, obligation. It had passed. Not more confident, but more anchored, itch stroked thick with intent. She wasn't sketching to interpret anymore. She was sketching to shape. The recursion had found her voice. Jonah gave her the old coordinates, the ones handed to him by his older self, and told her only this: blank still, but it would not stay that way for long. On the first page, he drew a single symbol, a spiral unfurling outward, and beneath it Camille, 1917. In one town, he found a boy drawing strange patterns in chalk on a cellar wall, maps of places that didn't exist yet. In another, a group of refugees whispered about dreams of glass staircases and floating cities. He recognized the signs. Camille's sketches had already begun to ripple outward. The recursion had resumed, bent now toward something new. Jonah became the courier once more, leaving drawings where they might matter, whispering symbols to the right ears, teaching the art of binding truth into paper and letting it bloom forward, but always, always moving, because it could no longer be fixed. Too much had been drawn. A protester painting the same triangle circled out onto a placard without knowing why, each unaware they were part of something ancient, something recursive, something alive. The drawings continued to appear, in war zones, in dreams, in places where time grew thin and the world needed remembering. Each sketch a tether, each hand another hinge. Jonah watched from the shadows of time, older now than he had any right to be, but still drawing, not as a prophet, not even as an archivist, but as a gardener. And the recursion, it bloomed. The recursion had bent, but it had not yet broken. Jonah stood on the balcony of a crumbling estate, overlooking a winter-still valley, bare trees black against a pewter sky. The land hushed, as if holding breath. Far below, a train slid through the snow, its engine bleeding pale smoke into the grey. The year was 1938, though time no longer mattered as much to him. He was older now, worn not by age but by knowledge. The lines on his face were familiar. He had seen them drawn before in notebooks, not yet written. He wore a heavy coat, frayed at the cuffs, the triangle circle dot faint, now on its sleeve. Camille had vanished years ago, not lost, not taken, simply moved beyond his sight. Her sketches had begun appearing across continents, visions of wireless libraries, sky bridges hung between continents, cities that grew like coral. He saw echoes of her drawings in blueprints and children's storybooks, in strange murals that appeared on ruined buildings and disappeared the next day. She was shaping the new arc. Jonah's role, as ever, was to witness. He reached into his satchel and retrieved his current notebook, the 7th, perhaps the 9th. He had stopped counting. On its last page was a drawing he hadn't consciously made, a pair of eyes, closed in sleep, but crying black tears. Below them, the words. He'd buried the last of those timelines by burning their final notebooks. This one, though this one still had breath, still had Camille, he had to find her again. In Marseille, a woman sold charcoal portraits of strangers she'd never met, portraits that aged visibly on the paper, as if time refused to hold still. Jonah listened, collected whispers, left fragments behind, pages torn from his notebooks, folded into lampposts, tucked beneath pews, dropped into coat pockets. All breadcrumbs, all roads, he hoped, leading to Camille. He followed her sketches like signposts. One appeared in Lisbon, a mural painted on a crumbling hospital wall, depicting a gate formed not of stone or steel, but of human silhouettes. Another in Warsaw, a girl holding a pen that bled both ink and music. Each piece carried her rhythm. Finally, in Prague, he saw the symbol again, the triangle circle dot, painted small, subtle, in the corner of a stairwell beneath a ruined synagogue. But beneath it, a new sign, a spiral, half broken. Jonah's breath caught. A warning. Camille was faltering. "I thought you were dead," she said softly. "I was. Several times. It never lasted. They're interfering, now replacing drawings with simulations, truth with spectacle. They've learned to draw without seeing, not to bind the future, but to distill the past. Truth not as vision, but as memory." It showed a trench, muddy, shallow water pooling in the corners. A young soldier crouched over a notebook, pencil in hand, eyes haunted but focused. Jonah, but beside him, a second figure took shape, added by Camille's hand, a ghosted outline of herself, watching him from across time, across recursion, not a spectre, not a memory, a witness. The page shimmered slightly under the lamplight, not from moisture, but from density. There was gravity in this drawing, a weight of everything that had ever been drawn before it. Camille paused. "What are we drawing? Really?" Jonah packed slowly, wrapping the finished sketch in waxed cloth, sealing it with a ribbon of black thread. He handed it to Camille. "This is the final tether, not to bind the recursion but to offer it choice. You're the first of what comes next." The sea stretched black and endless before him, the horizon smudged with early fog. No ships, no birds, just presence. He sat in the sand and opened his last notebook. One blank page remained. He stared at it for a long while. Then, without sketching, wrote a single sentence. He closed the notebook and placed it in the surf, letting the tide claim it. He didn't watch it go. Camille didn't hide the sketch in the wind. She gave it to a printer in Krakow who thought it was surrealist art. He made 50 copies, slipped them into magazines, and within a month the image was circulating with no context, no signature. It appeared on a theater poster in Rome, a cafe menu in Marseille, even a child's schoolbook in Buenos Aires. Each recipient saw something different. Some said it was a portrait of grief. Others thought it was a warning. A handful, those with the right kind of memory, knew exactly what it was. No one claimed to have built it. People just ... found it. They entered and drew inside it. The drawings grew together, layered, spiraled, folded into one another. Each new image didn't overwrite the last, it harmonized. The recursion had begun to compose, a chorus of memory, growing louder. Camille came there once a year. She never stayed, but she always left a sketch behind. One year, a girl flying through a library like a bird. Another, a man standing on a beach, the tide at his feet, holding nothing. No names, no signatures. Only the mark, the spiral, a page fluttering from a window, showing a door in a field. Always that same feeling when found. déjà vu tinged with warmth, like being remembered by someone you hadn't met yet, even if you forget why. The recursion may bend, it may tremble, but for now, it rests. The sketches have been made, the message is sent. Somewhere, perhaps in the fold of a book or the crack of an old wall, a drawing waits to be found, its lines still pulsing with memory. You made it through. Maybe you didn't survive every twist and fold of this tale unscathed. Maybe some part of it will follow you into the quiet parts of your night. But that's what stories do, the ones drawn from truth. They linger, they echo. So, if you ever see a gate standing alone in a field, if you come across a torn sketch of a trench or a woman beneath an aurora sky, you'll know, you'll remember, and that is enough. The recursion continues, not in this story perhaps, but in you, in the act of remembering, of witnessing, of choosing not to forget. Take a breath, now, longer than before. Let it fill your lungs like wind behind canvas. The war is over. For now, let the final image soften in your mind, a child drawing by firelight. Somewhere in the world, anchoring the future one trembling line at a time. Sleep well, sketcher. You've earned it.